So let's go ahead and get it started. I'm going to start with you, Will, if you don't mind.
Fire
How
away.
do the raw technical systems benefit the warfighter in this era of digital modernization, and which systems do you find create those force multipliers that we're always looking for?
So being around technology for long enough, you realize that processes and systems actually, and like how technology manifests, where it starts and how it's delivered, actually dictates how useful it is in the end. And so I think about this in two ways. One is if raw technical systems or technical systems that our defense organizations and intel organizations that they need, the way to make it useful is to get upstream. Too many technologies are delivered, especially commercial technologies are delivered and then bolted on, or you create these Frankenstein monster stacks that end up being much less useful, much less affordable, much less secure. So first principle about making technology useful is actually, and one of the partnerships that we look for in the commercial sector is to get left of technology delivery and to get into the roadmap. Because as a CTO, the roadmap is everything to us. In a tech company, the roadmap is everything. That's where we spend our money is our vote. So first, getting left of delivery is absolutely critical, and creating pathways to create commercial leverage so that when it's built, it has the right impact level, it has the ability to be accredited. That's absolutely crucial. So that's more of a principle. Something I think we can do a much better job of as a community, both from the defense side as well as the commercial side. Now I'm going to nerd out because I love technology. There are probably 4 areas that I see most often in terms of technical systems providing capabilities to the warfighter defense intel community today. Number 1, and this may seem very basic and very boring to many of you, but it's just scalable compute. The original premise of the cloud was you could have elastic compute. When you needed it, where you needed it, and when you didn't, you could shut it off, and it was great. You didn't have a data center that now you had to fill up with a bunch of applications that you're really just justifying keeping and you don't really actually use, but you need a utilization rate of X percent, and so you keep these applications around. And in raw compute, a really good example of how just simple compute platforms can transform defense. The Air Force and DIU, we've worked with them over the past couple of years to support an AR/VR environment for pilot training. So before, if you're a pilot, you actually had to go and attend a physical classroom, physical systems. Now through AR, VR, and a scaled compute platform, they're getting like 8, 9x throughput in pilot training. So you can't project power if no one's actually flying the aircraft. So that's area number 1, is just raw scalable compute. The second one I think about, and I think about this a lot because it's kind of the union of commercial practices and how you do innovation in the government, are collaboration platforms. Again, this may seem very straightforward and obvious to many of you, but it's interesting how much the tools we use dictate what we create, how we communicate, and kind of our mission effectiveness. So one example here is not too long ago, if you're joining the Army as a new recruit, you might not get an email address. So right away, what you're being told is, you're not actually equivalent to everybody else out there in the force. You don't get to communicate with everybody the way the others do. And it's a very demotivating experience when you don't feel that affinity. I mean, these are people signed up to defend our country and they don't even get email. I mean, come on, what year is this? Is this like 1985? So through some great partnerships with the Army, and we've been really privileged to travel a journey of taking a commercial platform like Google Workspace and making it available for now over 250,000 soldiers in the Army who wouldn't have had an email address, wouldn't have been able to communicate, use modern tools. And that's a very motivating thing to see how just simple commercial platforms with the right security controls in place can kind of create a culture too. And by the way, it's what they're all using in their private lives. So now instead of having to use their personal Gmail or other accounts, now they actually get to use one that the Army is certifying, accrediting, and making safe for them. Third one, and maybe this, I'm sure Craig will have something to say on this later, is practical artificial intelligence. And what I mean by practical artificial intelligence, it means when you woke up this morning and you checked your phone, or you got in the car and you drove somewhere, or you got online and maybe you looked at a streaming service and you were trying to choose which show and they were giving you recommendations. You deal with AI every single day, all the time in your everyday life. And sometimes we get dazzled by these, massive applications of technology and kind of what I would call more of the entertainment AI.
ChatGPT.
I'm not here to single out any other organization, in the commercial world, but there's a lot of hype, and there's some entertaining uses of AI out in the world today, but what I see, what I care a lot about, especially when it comes to defense and intelligence, is practical applications of machine learning.
Sure.
So one example of this, and this, again, very simple, everyday example, working with NavC out in Japan, all we did was give them early access to live transcriptions for their Google Meet, so their video conferences, but translated into Japanese and vice versa. And it was incredible to see the pace of productivity go up when you didn't have to have human translators, or you didn't have to take notes, go take it somewhere else, then filter it through making sure all the words are right and all the verbs and nouns, and it's just happening in real time. Something we all take for granted today is just the ability to communicate with other people. And then finally, I told you I could nerd out all day, so this is the last one, I promise. And this is security.
Sure.
And at least something we've learned painfully firsthand over the last decade plus at Google, and I think many are learning now, is that the volume of threats are only going to continue to go up. We had to thwart a denial of service attack last year. I think it was roughly 46 million requests per second, which is the equivalent of all the requests to Wikipedia over a day in 10 seconds. And so baking that type of security into platforms is a critical need for commercial entities. It's also a benefit that the government gets when they can adopt more commercial technologies. So for example, if you live in one data center and you only use one data center, guess what? You're stuck. And that DDoS attack is going to be successful. If you can shard and you can spread the impact and you can use networking and some other modern technology approaches to diffuse the attack, you can keep on rocking. And so those are the 4 areas in technology that I see every day: practical application, and from a cloud perspective and from a Google perspective, continuing to look for pragmatic, built-in, intuitive applications of technology that we were just talking about, like meetings, like maintenance centers.
Sure.
That's where so much benefit we can have so much benefit with so little effort.
Yeah, great response. Anyone else from the panel want to comment?
I'll comment. One of the first things you mentioned was getting to the left. And I think that is incredibly critical. And we have to help all of our functions across our programs understand what that means. So the first thing I thought was, I'll use an example. I won't say the service, but we are advising on a major $1 billion plus program and looking for opportunities to not block innovation in the work that they're doing. One of the major procurements is going to let a task order in year 5 for transformation and innovation. It's too late. We are in a $1 billion modernization effort to overhaul the technical debt at that point. So you have to also help upskill your teams to know, how do I bake getting left into everyday thinking and into how we design our requirements to be more outcome focused and things like that, which I'll come back to when we talk about metrics, but getting left, that really resonated.
Can I chime in on practical AI? Yeah, I think calling it practical AI is the right answer. And I'm going to interpret practical AI in this case to mean easily having a human escape hatch. So in all of the examples that he gave, if the system got it wrong, it's okay. Like if search is not perfect, it's all right, you research. You type in some new words and you try again. If the transcription was a little off, a native speaker would go, well, that sounds odd. And then they would jump in and try to fix it. And so having a human escape hatch, meaning let the human override what the AI is doing or fix it when it gets it wrong, is vitally important. I think for military applications, it's really incumbent upon us to think very hard about this. And so I love that you said practical when most of the pitches for AI are pixie dust, magical pixie dust pitches for AI, which by the way are magic, and magic doesn't exist. So I just want to let everybody know that. Magic doesn't exist. There is no solution here today. But those magical pixie dust ones really mean solve all of my really hard problems instantaneously so I don't have to expend human capital to do it. And I think that's the wrong place for us to be hoping for the solutions. We need solutions where there can be a human escape hatch.
I want to try to thread the needle on actually all three of you. So I'm looking at this.
This is good practice for your dissertation defense.
Right.
Well, thanks. Yeah. It's going swimmingly. So I love the human element, but I want to, my goal is to remove the human element from as much as possible. And I do not mean the escape hatches. I do not mean the systems engineering perspective. I mean, and this is unfortunate, but it's the posture I have to take. War is a cruel thing. I want robotics. And robotics are part of that whole AI umbrella that we never talk about because AI is such an amorphous term. But the practical application here is really important because what it really means is how do I give very bite-sized chunks and allow robotic systems, robotic processes, whether they're on autonomous systems that are alone and unafraid or autonomous software processes that are running, bite-sized chunks and not overestimate what I expect from them because quite frankly, we do not expect very much from people, right? So we allow an awful lot of human error in an awful lot of processes. And in our everyday lives, we accept a huge amount, a huge confidence interval from what we see from AI. So I love the navigation. I am useless without navigation at this point in a new city, right? I could break out a map, but I'm useless. And that's a very, very sort of in-your-face one.
But if it sends you to a lake, you don't drive into the lake.
Exactly.
That's the human escape hatch.
Exactly. And I think we can take those rules, so those common sense rules, we can actually put those into systems as well.
Yeah.
Because if I've got a robot, let's take an Uber or a Tesla or or a Weibo, like
Or a
any
Lyft.
vehicle, and that LiDAR electro-optical camera sees a whole bunch of water, maybe don't do it. And we can actually build those stops. And so I think I'm violently agreeing with all of you, but I also think that getting left of that means codifying in some practical terms what those stops really are.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's.
I'm sorry. Please.
No, you go ahead.
I think you push the human in the loop problem back a level by saying train the system to not do the things that humans would not do. But how do you know that system's going to get it right? The systems that have life and death that life and death depends upon have to have a human in the loop, or at least a human on the loop, evaluating it to make sure.
Yeah, policy layers on top and humans.
And this, I think the right use of AI in dangerous situations are AI-human interaction, AI-human teaming.
Absolutely. The Centaur model is proven.
Okay. Then I agree.
Great conversation. Thank you so much. I do want to, we have to move a little bit forward.
Wait, I want to talk about centaurs.
I do want to move on to going back to metrics
said no magic.
and your conversation before, Meagan, and expound upon that, especially in digital transformation. We have a lot of metrics that we tend to try and lean on to defend it or prove ROI. Those metrics can be kind of quantified into two buckets, in the tangible and intangible. What are those tangible and intangible metrics that you tend to show benefit and cost and ROI on that's expected when we do these digital transformations for the Department of Defense?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying setting goals and metrics is one of the most important things you need to do. It is the hardest thing to get right, hands down. And when it comes to digital transformation, I think the biggest question kind of gets back to you talking about what problems are we solving. It's like, what outcome, what problem are you actually trying to solve? We're not just going to do digital transformation for the sake of it. It's shiny, it's sexy, it's cool, whatever that might be. But if it doesn't accomplish something, what are you doing it for?
Sure.
And so the goals and the metrics you set should not be so prescriptive. They should be focused on what outcome you're trying to achieve, right? And so that seems pretty obvious. You would be shocking at how hard that is to get right. Now, the thing about it is that metrics aren't just to say, are we succeeding or not? Metrics drive behavior. That is probably the most important use of a metric, hands down, on your team. What behavior are you wanting to incentivize and drive? And if you do it wrong, the unintended consequences are very, very large. So if you're setting that overarching goal and metric around an outcome, every single function and every single team you need in digital transformation has to see themselves and set their own outcomes against that same goal. So let me give an example. I kind of mentioned procurement, right? Your procurement teams, your finance teams, they all need to have associated goals and outcomes related to what you want to accomplish in your digital transformation effort, right? Otherwise, if it's not set towards the North Star, everyone's doing their own thing, and you end up in silos. and you end up with conflict and your team, the culture suffers, the intangible culture, those types of things go to waste. So in a commercial company, for example, your sales team is not going to have different goals that aren't aligned with your marketing team, that aren't aligned with your delivery team, which aren't aligned with what your engineers can actually build. So in that same way, in a bureaucracy, you need all of the functions to have that same alignment towards the outcome you're going to achieve, right? Seems pretty simple, very, very hard. You can't do that without engaging the workforce. In the same way we talk about human-centered design to help design our systems and our requirements, that you have to set that vision, that North Star, but you need your teams bought in and you need their input on what is actually possible. Now, the other thing around metrics that gets really interesting, and we see this quite a bit, especially when we're trying new things. We're trying new technologies and practical AI. We don't know if it's going to work, right? We just don't know. And time again, I see setting metrics as if it's going to work. So the thing that we are going to measure is the outcome that we hope this thing is going to achieve. We're just not sure if it's going to happen. Well, if it doesn't hit it, we didn't fail. We failed if we couldn't actually figure out if it worked or not, right? So some of the most interesting metrics for digital transformation, I think, are, did we answer the question, right? If I get to the end of this prototype or something that we're trying around digital transformation, and I go, well, that was a total bust, but I know why it was a total bust, so I can do something different. Fantastic, we succeeded, we hit our metric. Actually, we answered it. How many times have we seen programs fund the mistake and fund the mistake and fund the mistake? I'm like, just keep going. Oh, it didn't work, put more money into it. Next thing you know, you're hauled to the hill, you spend $1 billion and you have no freaking program that works, right? Because we couldn't actually answer the question. So what are you measuring and what outcome do you want? That's kind of where I would start. And it's very gnarly and very hard.
Alex, you look like you had thoughts.
Yeah. So audience participation. I need everybody to put your hand up real quick because I want to exemplify a point. Everyone, text with one hand. Okay.
Text with one hand.
So keep your hand up if you are super cool with the government just wasting money on stuff that's failing. Okay, those guys are saying. So
where's
that's
that
the
one
problem.
person?
Right.
Sorry, wasting money on what? I didn't hear you.
We talk about digital transformation, and it's that fail fast mentality, and we absolutely need it. And I'm gonna try to hit on this more in the culture piece. But getting left also means implementing your metrics on what is acceptable failure to make a point to move on. Because otherwise we keep doing that and it's atrocious.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that everybody's on the same page with that's not the model that we want to continue to incentivize.
Well, one of the things we talk about a lot in developing technology for, especially in places like AI or analytics or places where it's really hard to know a priori that you're going to land what you're trying to land, is I'll shorthand it. It's called innovation exhaust, and usually this exhaust is like capacity building. So by trying and failing and recovering and doing again, what you're actually doing is you're building the capacity in the workforce to use design thinking. I kind of heard you say that without you saying, I could hear it ring in my ears. To learn best practices for software, to learn about vulnerabilities and how they make their way into creating systems that depend on open source plus proprietary plus government created. All these different things come out of trying. And so there's always a delicate balance too of creating metrics and measures that will allow you the time and space to reap some of that exhaust, but also you can't just be rudderless and spending because of momentum. And usually where I see the biggest issue, because I deal with all of our top commercial customers as well as public sector, and it's no different if you're talking about a Fortune 1000 company or you're talking about defense organization. Momentum is the single biggest thing you're trying to remove, because it's so much easier just to program where it was last year, just to make an incremental change over here. It's really, really hard to break momentum. And so, by building up some of this exhaust and by building capacity, what it also does, it gives you a groundswell to go take bigger risks over time, because you feel like you're actually going to, maybe you actually will succeed this time, versus there's a lot of digital transformations that are laying on the side of the road, right? So there are real cautions to, big change agendas that don't have the internal capacity and knowledge to make them successful. If like you're hoping that someone's going to come in from the outside and say, digital transformation, and like, here's your SOP, and like, here's all the tools, and here's all the stuff, it's never going to work, ever. Yeah. You have to be, as leaders in your organizations, you have to have the talent, you have to have the skills, you have to have it organic, or sooner or later it'll break.
Well, one, I want to say anytime Will does jazz hands on a panel, you've succeeded for the day. But to your point, I keep harping on outcome-based metrics, but it allows for more flexibility and creativity with your workforce, right? Don't be so prescriptive in exactly how they have to get there, but they better get that outcome that they need, right? So if we come in and we measure the living hell out of everything, there's no room for the innovation and the creativity that your workforce could bring to the table, and rather set that outcome and then look, what are the key indicators? One thing we do at Decode, it sounds super simple, but if someone has an idea that they want to try, say, well, what outcome is it going to get us against our larger mission, and how are we going to know it's going to work? What indicators are you looking for, and on what time frame are you going to know that answer? And at that time point, we look at the indicators and we keep it or we kill it, and we move on. Oversimplified, much more complicated, but you get the framework. So it's like, tell me you need to go to the moon, don't tell me you need the rocket with the boosters. There's companies actually slingshotting stuff into space right now. So just to illustrate the point.
So I think that's right. From an industrial perspective, that sounds exactly the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. But implicit in that is the ability to align individual incentives with corporate outcomes, right?
Sure.
You stated corporate outcomes, and then you said, well, you better do those outcomes. Because there's implicit incentives that you didn't state, mostly employment at will and bonuses and your paycheck.
I do like
I think it's much more difficult to think about how to do that alignment in a government setting. And then not just because employment is very different, but if you think about the DoD as a whole, it may seem top down, but it's actually not. There's far more than one sovereign, right? There are tons of sovereigns in the DoD. So it's a much larger challenge to set those metrics at scale in the DoD. I don't have an answer, but it's hard.
But I think that's a great setup to talk about talent. I mean, especially when you look at promotion paths.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's a perfect transition to start talking about how digital transformation is more than just the systems and the metrics, and is really transforming our workforce, their skills, the way that they train, the way that they deploy, the way that they create new processes. And the Army Software Factory is a phenomenal example of this new dynamic of taking soldiers that are mechanics and logistics officers and communications officers and teaching them to be coders and program managers. And now the Marine Corps Software Factory announced this afternoon, congratulations, General, doing the same thing along with that partnership. So I'm going to point that at you, General. As this digital transformation really goes beyond those systems, how does the digital transformation of our warfighters and our Marines act as a force multiplier for a more effective military?
Well, I'd like to put it in a little story. I came from 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing. I went up to Marine Corps Forces Cyberspace Command. I had, my mission was to secure, operate, and defend the Marine Corps Enterprise Network and to execute a offensive cyber operations support of U.S. Cyber Command. Walked into that office a little intimidated, be honest with you. And within a week or two, I get 4 majors walk into my office. And they say, sir, our network sucks, and we're going to do something about it. You know, one was a double major at Naval Postgraduate School. One was a MARSOC
That is not my fault.
that went to Morgan Stanley. Another one was an Amazoner who reserved, came back on active duty. And the fourth was just a grumpy old commo. I grabbed my G3, who was an infantry officer. You're figuring this out. And I said, JR, give him top cover and let's go. So they create this hypothetical, mythical, I should say, and hypothetical thing called Task Force Phoenix. Anybody's ever read the Phoenix Project? It was the very first thing I read when I got to this job. And they created this magical, mythical, capable team of teams. You know, people that thought at the grade of major and below, just like them, that we suck. And every morning at 7:30, we met our daily scrum, and there they were just railing away at everything we were going to do. My job was really simple. It was twofold. One, obstacle clearance. That was my job, right? That was the first and foremost, sir, we need this, or that. And then the second one was probably more important than the first one, and that was humility, right? That I showed up every day as commander of the organization, really paying attention to every word they had to say. Why? Because I probably was the dumbest guy in the room. It was supposed to take 24 plus months, estimated by the acquisition community. And believe it or not, there were renegades from that community that joined this team of teams. And in 6 months, they completely got our network, as clunky as it was, into a cloud environment. Let me tell you something. Today, it's the most amazing thing I have seen. And watching it transform like that was pretty amazing. So I became very quickly a believer in this idea of talent, right? And those 4 Marines went on to lead our most impactful combat mission teams as commander, doing really things I'm proud of for this great nation. Talent, right? I realized it didn't take long, right? That this is a special group, special insights. People were attracted to them, and they got it done. And that ink blot I can place all over the Marine Corps. We got a couple of our most incredible staff NCOs sitting right here in the front row. They've done similar things, not a lot of organizational support, but their imagination, their insight, and their innovation. We can't hold them back. That's why this opportunity to work with the Army Software Factory, my experience says we have this talent, man, and we're gonna empower it. And everybody says always, well, they're gonna get out and join you industry because you pay them so much money. I don't know, right? So I had this great experience that we put these Marines, mentioned, against a mission. You empower them, man, you kind of, give them what they need, man, you just watch it. And, General Nakasone just briefed an open testimony yesterday how, the Marine Corps, thanks to guys like John Schreiner, have the highest retention rate up at U.S. Cyber Command, doing some of the most amazing things. Why? And maybe it's just a bit of Marine Corps ethos, or it's maybe knuckleheads like me that have to do it, right, this humility thing, but the Marines are empowered, and they're off and running. And our job is to create an environment of success, like here at Austin, and then empower them and reinforce it as best we can. It's a hell of a journey. It's all about people, and I think that's the Marine Corps way, regardless. But watching this, especially from an intellectual standpoint, pretty cool, pretty lucky.
Well, Dr. Martell, I know your office, when I spoke with them, talked about Dr. Martell's AI hierarchy of needs, and that training and personnel were critical to that. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, so we've been thinking pretty hard about this as we're thinking through what our talent management offerings are going to be to the department as a whole. We see it as a key enabler. So the hierarchy of needs is really just a tool that I use to let people know it goes data, analytics, AI, and it's not a true hierarchy because analytics and AI really aren't above or below each other, but it's really just to get at that without quality data, we don't have anything. Like AI without data is just broken, doesn't work. And analytics without data is pretty pictures on a dashboard, but it doesn't tell you anything. So we use that to really drive strategically what should we be getting at logically first. But underneath that is a couple of things. JWCC, getting cloud right so that as we build out these tools, we have a place to put them and the ability to access them. Apogee, for example, right? So there's lots of good technical things we need there that CIO is working on. But a big part of it is talent. If we don't have the right talent, we're not gonna be able to do much of anything. So we think about it 2 ways. One, how do we grow the talent that's already in the department? How do we take folks and turn them into the right kinds of practitioners? From a data and analytics and AI perspective, we no longer need experts. We need people who can use the tools to get the job done. So how do we provide that? And the second thing we think about is how do we avoid the Googles of how do we compete with the Googles of the world? Well, I don't think we should, right? Well, you're saying because you're here. We're friends. For talent.
Okay.
For talent. So look, if you went to a small
in the
handful of
octagon.
schools and you graduate with a computer science degree, your life's set. You can walk to any street corner in San Francisco and say, I know how to program, and 5 cars will screech to a halt and throw money at you, right? That's great, and I appreciate the folks who go after that path. But there's a set of schools that are a bunch of untapped talents, where we have people who aren't quite there, but they would love to have them. They would love to have access to them. They would love this larger pool of talents to be trained so that they actually can be top-notch data analytics and AI practitioners. So we start thinking about talent within the department, not as hire to retire, which is how it's always been, but how can we transform people's careers? How can we transform people's capabilities so they enter in, and we're a 3-4 year tour of duty that's really an apprenticeship. The end result of that is you guys start knocking on our door saying, we want your talent, we want your talent. Because if you come to us and start taking our talent at the end of the pipeline, people are going to want to enter that pipeline. So we're trying really hard to think about ways, not just to upskill, but there's a lot of untapped talent that needs some upskilling in the population as a whole, and we want to be able to tap into that and contribute to it.
And to your point around, the environment and creating like practical experience, one of the things that's really difficult is to find people who have dealt with like really large scale data sets, complex data.
That's right.
Multimodal.
We can give them that.
Right, and that is, the government has a unique capacity to provide that as like this training ground to people who want to serve the mission. On the flip side, it also, in my opinion, more can be done to create environments where you can rapidly experiment, test, use data versus a large program of record which has to be like consolidated requirements, training, doctrine, all the things, versus really unlocking that talent and allowing them to use modern tools, modern platforms, just to access data and see what they do with it. So I'm very, very bullish on the missions of government give access to data at scale, complex, multi-domain problems that you very rarely encounter until really only a few companies in the world deal with that level of complexity.
I'm pretty sure there's not an organization on the planet that has the data at scale that we do.
Probably
Sure,
not.
right?
So love that. And then, but I think there's also an opportunity to kind of rethink what it takes to free up the minimum viable amount of like compute and storage and network and modern applications and just software to be able to recombine data, try to solve some problems. And maybe they're not the big problems that you solve at the beginning, but you get used to working with data, and now you're creating real hardcore skills that make you transferable not only within the government, but also extremely transferable to the commercial world.
So I think one thing
Go ahead.
that I think we have a great opportunity in the DoD is to really look at the leadership that we have, because all of this is fantastic. I agree 1,000% that that's what we can do. There's a but coming. But most of our senior leaders did not come up through the ranks and get to the position they're in thinking they're going to run these missions that are technology programs. And there's not a single program in the DoD that's not technology driven. Full stop. We don't go into combat. You don't put a soldier in the field without having some kind of technology associated with them. So that requires senior leaders to ask different questions, just like you were saying. And no, you don't need to be technologist at the senior leader level, but you need to know enough to know what questions to ask so that you can keep this talent, because the talent largely wants to stay. I kind of agree with that. It's not just about money, and I'm going to tell a story real quick. So we were doing a training, it wasn't necessarily training, but we were working with 18 senior leaders from 1 stars to 3 stars across all the services on how do you get started with technological innovation, and what questions do you need to ask. And we ran a panel, and it was called Recovering DoD Innovators. And it was folks that were in these missions, and they tried their hardest to push the ball forward, and then they left. They just got out. And we said, okay, don't hold back. Like, what do you wish the senior leaders knew about why you left the organization? And one of them said, if my senior leader had given me top cover, I would have stayed forever.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me. It stuck with me for years to kind of listen, understand, and be the blocking and tackling, but know that we can't compete if we don't actually use the capabilities coming out of things like the software factory and get them into our missions and manage and lead in a way that's going to keep that and scale it.
I'm super passionate about this topic, so I just want to make one more comment, and that is that it's super hard to predict who the people are that are going to solve your hardest problems. It's not usually like, don't follow the role, don't like look at the job description. That's not who's going to do it. It's going to be some random person who probably doesn't even have that job title, doesn't have the degree that you think they're going to have, and just having some access and a couple collaborators, and all of a sudden they solve the hardest problems. We see this over and over and over again. I see it every single day at Google. I saw it when I was in the government and in the Army. So creating systems that actually, and this is why I think the software factories are such a huge point of leverage for the DoD, is because you're creating an environment where, hey, if somebody's got skills, it doesn't matter if you're a mechanic, an aviator, whatever, there might be a place to get leverage out of those folks and then kind of create the mentality and the culture that it's open to anybody. You don't have to be, like I was an artillery person. I got put into like cyber warfare, I was an effects officer. I had no idea what that meant when I got put into it. It just so happened that I happened to have some of the skills that made it kind of semi-relevant. But they're out there. They're in your organizations right now, and you have no idea who they are. So how do you create an environment that pulls them forward, and then they get access to this data and the tools and the leaders that provide top cover, and then you're off and running?
Yeah, so I want to double click on that, because the point that I was going to make is exactly that. It's a people-oriented sort of problem set. And this, please don't take this pejoratively. Like every problem is the Googleplex problem. Every problem that we throw money at is the Googleplex problem. And that is such a mildly interesting set of problems. The real problem is we've got 5,000 miles worth of people and stuff that are really in disadvantaged locations everywhere. And it's not an Army problem, it's not a Department of Defense problem, it's a US government problem. Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, the Guam, Taiwan, the Ryukyus, the Malaccas, like all these different places where they don't have this really robust infrastructure, but data is being generated and data needs to be assessed and organized and analyzed and indexed, and people need to do something. Otherwise, it's just bits and bytes that have no actual utility value. So the problem is so much more complex than the, hey, get everything into one place and then magic will happen, because I agree a lot of this is pixie dust, not real yet. But your domain, our domain experts, my domain experts, are the ones who are saying, I'm fighting this. I'm doing the thing every day. Please enable me to do it a little bit better without just becoming a cognitive prosthetic, and actually enabling them to have a ton of lift without just doing it incrementally better. So I wholeheartedly agree, but I want to make sure that everybody in the room, hey, you're in the fight now. Welcome to the fight. Like it's not just getting all the data back to the Googleplex or to the OSDs or to the big box in the sky, because Skynet's not here to do that for us. So it's this really wicked, distributed, decentralized, federated, pick every buzzword, it's those problems. That's where we're hamstrung.
Awesome. Fantastic conversation. I do want to move on and at least get this last one in because we've already had half this conversation. But Dr. Martell, there's been a lot of studies. Quantum Black has done several studies around the use of AI and the investment in AI, functional AI especially. More than half the companies as of 2023 are investing heavily in AI. What functional applications of AI and ML do you anticipate having the greatest impact for our forward operations?
You sent me that question the other day, and I'm not going to answer it.
Sure.
I'm going to answer something slightly different.
Okay.
And I'm going to start by telling a story because it was a great idea. I'm going to steal your idea. I was at LinkedIn I joined LinkedIn in 2013. That's an important year because I think TensorFlow was released in 2013. Yep. Yeah. The transformation of the release of that product it has yet to be documented. It has changed the world. Now, there are other frameworks in place now that are competitors, but functionally what that did is take massive amounts of difficult engineering labor that every AI model builder had to do themselves and made it easy. And now, it initially didn't make it easy, it was a pain in the butt. Right? But now there's all of this infrastructure. Well, I'll get there. So 2013, TensorFlow was released. Around 2014, I went to leadership at LinkedIn, and I said, our current model of talent acquisition is broken and won't sustain. And they laughed at me. What was the current model? Well, not all of them, one. But he's a friend, don't worry. The current model was buy as many super expensive, highly talented PhDs in machine learning as you could get. That's what every major company that wanted to do AI was doing in 2013. Google won that fight, by the way. So, I mean it. They set out as their goal to hire 90% of all top talent PhDs that they could every year. Smart move, because that was the way in which you did AI. You got as many unbelievably expensive, highly trained PhDs in machine learning that you could get. Not scalable. Maybe scalable for 3 or 4 companies on the planet, but that's it. Okay. What I noticed simultaneously with that lack of scalability with that talent model were these commoditizable tools, these frameworks that took their expertise and put them into systems that a well-trained practitioner could use.
Yep.
Simultaneously, kids graduating with computer science degrees were all finding AI really sexy. So they were taking 1, 2, or 3 AI courses in their undergraduate. When I was in computer science, that wasn't the case. AI was an esoteric field that only a few people went into. Now everyone takes it. So take talented computer scientists who know enough about AI and commoditized tools, taking the hardest parts of the engineering and making them non-existent. And now you have the capability of building a cadre of highly trained AI practitioners, no longer only needing a few of the experts who could help build out that framework. So building an AI model used to be 85% of a particular problem. And once this happened, and I would say it really happened in earnest around 16, 17, and now it's just a fact of the matter. Maybe 18 before it really started getting off. But now it's just a fact of the matter. And now that the cloud services are all mature, the infrastructure to build an ML ops pipeline, you just go pick from 1 of 5. They're all great. Nobody has to build that anymore, right? It's just there. And now everyone coming up with a computer science degree, and anyone even without a computer science degree, gets excited about building AI, right? Okay, so when this happens, you no longer have to buy these experts. You can find smart folks that you can train to be practitioners. So that is part of the talent question, but it's also part of what we think we need to provide. We need to provide 2 things. Well, we need to help talent grow within the departments. What are best practices we can provide? What's training we can provide? Think about professional military education. Can we, for enlisted folks, can we train them to be excellent practitioners and users of AI? For officers, can we train you to be excellent managers of AI products, right? And then we should be providing the tools and scaffolding that allows for those models to be built and those models to be delivered. By the way, I don't believe that the department should be building the models themselves. I think we should be contracting those models to people who are experts and will constantly be on top of state of the art. What I think we should be providing is the ability, our IP is the data itself. Our IP is the labeling of that data. Our IP is telling the truth to that data and handing that to a contractor. Right now, contractors in the whole do that for us, and that's a mistake because they are not subject matter experts. We are. On the other hand, is model monitoring. When you build a machine learning model, you train it on old data. You train it on historical data. So the day it's deployed, it's already stale. It's already broken. It's going to have to be retrained, and it's going to have to be retrained on a regular basis. And when the model gets something wrong, there has to be a feedback loop to correct that model. Now, most consumer AI companies allow you to do that at scale. For Google, for search, you either click on the result or you don't. That's immediate feedback, millions per hour at scale to Google. At Amazon, you either buy the shirt or you don't. That's millions of pieces of feedback per hour at scale to Amazon. We're not so lucky. if we're doing search and rescue and we detect a boat, the system says it is a boat in the water, but it's not, okay, one person types that in and fixes it. But how do we know that we missed a boat? These are really hard questions. So we're spending our energy and our time thinking about what's the scaffolding that goes around the building of a model, and what's the training necessary to create those practitioners. So I could give you some ideas about what I think are going to be really effective and useful models, or useful AI applications, but I actually think that's the wrong thing for us to be thinking about. I want to unlock the capability for anybody to show up and say, I think this might be an AI solution, here's the tools, and we can deliver it fast. So that's my story and my pitch.
I have to say thank you. I know, Meagan. I know. But I did promise that we would leave time for question and answer. Thank you so much to the panelists for the conversation. I'm going to invite Josh Marcuse up to go ahead and facilitate.
Over on this side, any questions? Ma'am?
Especially for the folks that are in DoD, can we talk a little bit about organizational structure? And I mean like how you have things arranged. For the Corps, we still need to present an external facing structure that other partners know how to plug into. But at the same time, my thought is, and I could be wrong, happy for anybody to correct me on this, if we keep the same structure to a degree, we continue to do things the same way. And so while it's been extraordinarily fun for me to like be loose in the back 40 as the lead technologist and cleaning up technical debt and getting things ready, we are now at a point where we need the rest of the organization to have the same sort of mindset so we can get to that tipping point. Interested in thoughts on organizational structure as it pertains to digital transformation. Thank you.
Me and Meagan were talking about this before we came in here. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Part of a bureaucracy myself, I will tell you, and don't stop. You are on the right track. But for our standpoint is the functionality. What are the outcomes that we want to generate? It still gets back to, I hate to say mission analysis, but as we look at our organizations, what truly are the outcomes? I'm a staff officer. I work for the Commandant of the Marine Corps. What the Commandant thinks like really matters. And when he wants to have transformation and to be able to fight in a heavy information warfare fight, we got to make sure that we're task organized functionally to execute what our Commandant wants in order to be effective. It's all about outcomes. You bring up a great point. How do you now move laterally? Right, because you're expected to interact with other people in a way that they expect you to interact. And when you're not organized in that fashion, it causes problems. I still believe, I say this a lot, and I use colonels, but colonels run the Marine Corps. That's where all the stuff happens from a Marine Corps standpoint. So I always thought, well, if we're going to have functional aspects to this, to the Deputy Commandant for Information thing, we'll lead it around colonels, empowered, and with all that empowerment has to go to the final aspect. So we are in the midst of that. I will tell you, from everything that was said here, we're not organized, right, to your point, in order to do the things that we're talking about. And, I talked about Task Force Phoenix, right? Why do we do that? Because we couldn't do it any other way. Our organization wouldn't allow us to do what we had to do. So, hey, let's make shit up. And, in the Marine Corps, or any DoD organization, right, we task organize. We're going to get a mission, we'll get a team of teams together, and here we go. Is it enduring? Probably not, right? And so, this art of, and you mentioned a few things, because I'm, task organized to do as you said, and I will tell you, we're not effective. We're not as effective as we need to be. So not a great answer, except that, back to whatever our boss thinks that we need to be able to do, damn it, we better be able to organize around the outcomes that have to be generated. And for me, it's the Commandant of the Marine Corps, it's force design. It's a very contentious issue. And, we got to show up with our armor on every day and do battle, so to speak. But it is hard. I think Meagan may even have a few better ideas than me, not to throw it at you.
It's up to Josh.
I'm never going to say no to hearing from Meagan, but keep it short because we got more comments.
Lots to unpack there. I'll definitely come find you. I'll give a very simple but interesting concept is map the nose. And if you look across the external organizations that you have to engage with, where are you going to hit the no people or the no groups? We know the type. How are you designed internally? Either it's an organization, it could be communication simply, or is there an upskilling opportunity to help bring them into the fold of how to help their skill sets develop to be able to catch what it is your organization's doing? And then you can come up with a pretty cool strategy. But that's my fast version.
That's great. Great, sure, Vago, and then Trish will be the last question.
Hey, thanks very much, everybody. Terrific discussion. So how do, Vago Maranian from Defense and Aerospace Report, I'm sorry.
Can you talk a little bit more loudly, please?
Yes, nobody's,
Much
there you
better.
go.
nobody's ever accused me of not being able to talk loud enough. Vago Maranian from the Defense and Aerospace Report. The question I've got is, we're looking at the DoD and the U.S. technological infrastructure.
Is it smoking?
What are the kind of capabilities the Chinese and the Russians have in a field that is getting increasingly distributed? China has some built-in advantages in terms of how it can collect data and use data. What's the state of sort of global play of the technology as everybody is seeking to weaponize it in one form or another? And General Wright, we're looking at a person in the loop and to oversee these decisions, whereas our adversaries may not be so encumbered. I mean, look at what's happening in Ukraine. The Russians don't care what they destroy in this process.
You want to take it, sir?
No.
Don't all fight over this one.
I got it.
Who wants this one?
Look, algorithms are there for everybody. No one's ahead of the game there. Talent's there for everybody. Our peers and us, we and our peers are equal with respect to talent. It's about when we're willing to use data, when we're willing to gather data, and what forces we're putting behind that. But I don't think this is a different question. So in lots of ways, it comes down to the ethics of our culture. What are we willing to gather? What are we not willing to gather? What are we willing to use, and what are we not willing to use? But I don't think that's very different than any other warfighting decision. Someone has to decide when is it the right time to use these munitions, and what are the civil liberties trade-offs or the life and death trade-offs we have to make about those things. And I think we have to have larger strategic conversations about when we're willing to when we're willing to gather data, when we're willing to apply it. So, did I sufficiently beg the question?
And I think our edge, and I sleep well at night knowing this, our edge is the insight, imagination, and innovation, and probably everybody in this room, parochially for me, the incredible Marines that we get to lead, right? That is our edge, and one we got to continue to fully empower.
Can I take it? Let's take an orthogonal approach to that, right? So we always talk about this technical overmatch thing, and it's not how our adversaries fight, right? It's just not. That's how we fight. Like the Chinese are going at informationalization and intelligentization, everything. Let me give you a statistic. So the front line in Ukraine is 800 miles, roughly. And last report from February last month was the Russians were lobbing roughly 20, and this is open source, like it's Googleable, roughly 20,000 artillery shells a day. That's like 22.2 repeating per square mile. Like what risk are you willing to take there? So the way that we fight is radically different as the United States, and it will continue to be radically different. So this notion that we're going to do what the adversary is doing better, and what the threat is doing better, I don't think it's a fair question. I think it's an interesting question, but it's not how we're going to base our investments off of, because it's how we're going to fight to overcome that. And I don't mean to be pejorative. Please don't take it
And I don't think
as
it's any different than having to ask that question about any technology,
right,
or any capability.
Correct.
Just to say,
Yeah. No, that's absolutely fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're dangerously over scheduled, but I'm having so much fun. I'm going to
gonna
wear
shake and
one last.
explode.
We have Trish, who's the president of Defense Unders Forums. We have our last question or comment, and then we're going to wrap up.
Thanks so much, Josh. I'm going to make it really quick, and this will be a one piece for each of the panel members. Clearly,
And you think that's going to be quick?
Yes, yes, because you
Just
have
one
this
question,
answer
but
right
5
on the tip of your
answers.
tongue.
That's fine.
So talent is something that you are all struggling with, and some of the talent acquisition pipelines are different if you're in the civilian government, if you're in the military, if you're in corporate. So can you give us each one life hack of how you are finding, attracting, and securing talent?
If I give it to them, they're going to steal it. I can't do that.
Have fascinatingly hard problems. It's remarkable how much people will care less about money and care about solving just absurdly hard problems. And we have absurdly hard problems.
Our number one
Yeah,
retention.
you can clap.
Beat that.
No, our best retention capability is mission. Put Marines on a mission, give them an environment of success. They will stay, they will fight.
Yeah, agreed.
True.
Over
We
to you,
don't have
Megan.
to clap for Google.
Let's see. People want to know they're going to be able to do what they do really well, and that they're going to be able to learn and progress. And so we're in a constant, it may be a different type of fight for talent, but it's definitely a constant fight for talent. And one of the things
And you have absurdly hard problems.
and we have I can't take your answers and just
You can,
say,
you can,
right?
you
Because
can.
then I wouldn't be as much clapping. So, for us, it's about making sure that if people choose to come to Google, that we give them the environment that allows them, that they don't find a bottleneck in, a computer and computation and network and those types of things. So
Yeah, because the DoD's figured all that out.
the environment that we're in, we have to make sure that they have the tools ready to go. See,
That was
no
good.
clap.
You founded it-
See, no clap.
I know, you're going mission, mission, like, they're taking my answer.
I know.
In the private sector, I would like to say it's super different, but anytime, candidly, we've hired people that weren't about our mission, it didn't work out. So a slightly different answer for us would be, what are the left and right bounds of the autonomy that you can give?
Yeah.
Right? It's
let
different for a
them go.
23-year-old than it is someone that's been in the workforce with experience. But either way, they want the ability to have ideas and understand why the answer might be no or yes. Right? So that isn't a free, willy-nilly, bring all your ideas and everyone is beautiful and smart. That's not true, unfortunately. But what are the left and right limits of where they can have ideas and input? And if they can't have that, they leave all day. Psychological safety.
Okay, no clapping. Just internalize this, and then I'm going to hand it over to Josh so he doesn't hit me with a coffee cup. You asked how we get our talent, like where we're going. I'm going to give you just a short story. I realized that this was a real problem when I walked down Route Disney and all the things that my dad had said to look out for because he had been on Route Disney, because I inherited his war, were there. I'm really tired of walking out of the Pentagon and hearing 7-gun salutes. I'm really tired of it. So my goal is to make sure my brother doesn't have to do this, and he's 10 years younger than me. So I will go wherever. I will ask whomever is in the force, if they're a friend or a colleague, if they're the right person, let's get them in. And it hurts every time I ask somebody, hey, are you on? And they go, let me tell you about this horror story of hiring. So my job is not to hire people right now. My job is to body block and stand on people's desks to figure out what the process is. And I'm going to break that process. And if there's one promise I will make, I will break it. So.
Please, one last round of applause. This was amazing.